Hello and welcome back to the Digital Marketing Podcast. My name is Kieran Rogers.
I'm Louise Crossley.
And I'm Daniel Rolls.
And today we are discussing personal branding.
So it's worth summing up, first of all, what we mean by personal branding. And I think with that, you need to start with what branding means.
Oh,
okay. So I wrote a book on the topic, funnily enough. And the definition we kind of came to in the end was that it's the sum of all touch points that you have with that thing, right? So when you talk about a brand, we quite often think about things like Adidas and Nike, and we think about the logo. And yeah, that's part of it. But actually, it's the experience you have with their products, the experience on the website, the customer service experience, all those kind of things as well.
So I've just got a new puppy. Yesterday morning, puppy bit me on the nose. That's definitely now part of her personal brand in my book.
Right. Yeah, we remembered it's an activity carried out.
Yeah.
And it will
What was your definition?
It's the sum of all touch points you have with that individual.
That was a touch point.
That was definitely
several touch points. Actually, she's got a lot of teeth. Yeah.
I'm just glad you haven't come with teeth marks on your face there. The video
yesterday
version.
morning I did.
Really?
I didn't realise because I was cuddling the puppy, and then we noticed there was blood on the puppy's nose, and it's like, oh
dear.
My wife saw me and she went, "Oh my god!"
Oh, but she's so cute. You have to let her off.
Yeah, it was worth it. Yeah.
So these touch points, hopefully not on your face with sharp teeth, but if you think about that from a personal point of view, then it's the one-to-one interactions, it's the online interactions, and then it's your kind of social footprint and your digital footprint, full stop. So that whole thing of, if I go in and Google you, what shows up in the search results? What kind of things do you say in social media and so on as well? And that all becomes part of this. So you've got this personal brand, and it's you and all the stuff that you're doing online. And quite often when people go into a new job or they're starting their career in something, they think, right, I'm going to go and sort my profiles out. So that's a really good starting point. Profile images. Let's think about the fact that even your Facebook profile, that image is going to be public. So if your brand's going to be consistent, you want to make sure anything that's public facing from your personal side of thing aligns. Lock everything down, make sure it's still personal, but your Instagram profile picture will become publicly available and so on. So just be aware of how that sits into the whole. Also, bear in mind that, be honest with yourself about your LinkedIn picture. Does it actually look like you? Okay, I'm not talking to you in particular.
You are though.
I'm not, honestly,
no,
I'm not.
because mine's like 14 years old.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Not you, but
better looking version of what you see before you. Wow,
is that possible? Wow.
Take a look.
Okay.
Still there, I think. Yeah.
So the reality is, I mean, I'm guilty of this. I'll be teaching people about social selling, whatever it might be. Your profile image needs to be you in a professional context. And I was looking at it going, that's what I used to look like in a professional context. I don't so much anymore. So I think making sure that those kind of things are, and all the basics of those things. Do some keyword research. Your LinkedIn profile, your Twitter, your Instagram bios include the words that you think that people might be searching for that are kind of relevant for your stuff as well. But really, my point here to some extent is that if you're ranting about stuff negatively, that can have a really damaging effect on your personal brand. And actually, you came out with a really interesting piece around this, around some of the way that that Google processes language and how good they are at this entities, things like this.
This was really just something that came out of looking at Google's natural language API. So it's just Google natural language API, and you go there, and actually on that page, you've got a bit of demo text, and you can run the natural language API, and it pulls it apart, and it shows you how an algorithm looks at a bunch of words on the page.
It's actually really interesting just understanding how search engines work.
But it struck me that when you do this, like first thing it shows you is it can pull out all the objects and entities. Like it can know when you...
ChatGPT can do this actually. If you just give it a block of text and say, identify the entities, it will say this is a person, this is a location, and all those kind of things as well.
So it can do that. But then it's also kind of gone one further, and all of those entities and objects that it's identified, it then sentiment scores them. Right, so it's taking a look at the language around them and giving it a score of magnitude. Is it positive or negative? And actually, what it got me thinking is, oh my gosh, if the systems have access to that, then literally, let's just take this, Louise, like everywhere Louise Crossley is mentioned, Well, I don't know. Do we know how many Louise Crossleys there are? No, there's probably quite a few. I know there's several Kieran Rogerses.
I thought so.
Because we interviewed one of them on the podcast just purely off the back of his name, bizarrely. Actually, no, he was a nice guy, and he was also in marketing, which kind of helped. But we don't know how many there are. But Google would be able to know that with all of the references it's scanning, because it will see, okay, there's an entity here called Louise Cross, and she's in Jersey, and she worked at Target Internet, previously worked at this agency, right? So it's going to understand those things. It's also going to understand wherever the entity that is Louise Crossley, like online, wherever anybody said anything about that entity, it's going to be like scoring it on kind of in terms of positive or negative magnitude. And actually, that's kind of scary. Actually, let's just say like the conspiracy theorists are all correct and AI takes over. Might just decide that actually, based on what everyone has said, doesn't like you very much. So you're out. Yeah. Going to cancel your account.
Well, this is interesting because what this means is that understanding entities, it will know there's different Daniel Rolleses. Yeah. Okay. And it will therefore be able to prioritize one over the other in a different context. Now, I know there's a guy called Dan Rolls who is a photographer, and he must hate me because if you Google the name, just by nature of the fact we work in digital marketing, a lot of our stuff comes at the top. But if you maybe were searching for photographers or wedding photographers or whatever type, portrait photographers, and then you search Dan Rolls, you would theorize that Google would then prioritize his stuff, you would hope as well. So actually, by going through and making sure you're thinking about your footprint, i.e., maybe by actually writing for a number of industry magazines and submitting content and then getting them to link back to my profile, that can help contextualize who I am. So if I'm called John Smith and I want to stand out against all the other John Smiths,
it's a tough gig,
It is, right? So that's how you would kind of think about, okay, I'm not going to always show up number one, but I can contextualize it from that point of view as well. So think about what shows up in the search results. In line with that, I had a student of mine that was basically saying, I did something when I was young. I posted online about it, and it still shows up in the search results, and I want to get rid of it now. Okay, what it was doesn't really matter. And there is a right to be forgotten, certainly across the EU and lots of other places as well, where you can go to Google and say, I want this removed, and because it's something that's not relevant anymore. In that circumstances, absolutely. You must say you do something, and then maybe there's a big thing about this. You're protesting in a particular thing, and now you've gone on to be a lawyer, and you can't really have the two things showing up at the same time, potentially, for some reason. Then you could go to Google and say, can you please remove this? Now, where the risk comes, say I'm a consultant, and I go into companies advising them on digital marketing, and all of my past 5 clients have then gone bankrupt shortly afterwards. This has not happened. I'd like to caveat, okay?
Hypothetical.
So, hypothetical. And then I get charged with that.
Yeah.
I go to prison for a period of time. Yeah. I come out and I start my new consultancy. I could go to Google and say, that's not relevant because I've served my time, which is right to some extent as well. So there's some grey areas with these things as well. But you do have that right to be forgotten if you want to go through and do that. I think from a professional point of view, LinkedIn is important. Doesn't matter what industry you work in, LinkedIn is going to be really important. Take a look at your SSI score, your social selling index. It basically breaks down your score out of 100 into how well it thinks you're using LinkedIn, but also it will benchmark you against your industry. So it's your industry average, but also your network. Now, actually, you want a really high scoring network because that means you're connected to really great influential people. So that can be a really kind of good thing to do as well.
So just on personal branding as a whole, why do we really need to focus on personal branding? Because say if you've got an agency and you want to push that brand out, why do you need to focus on the way that you come across as well?
2 things, I guess. One is that you may not work at that agency forever. So there's that whole like me as an entity needs to stand alone so I can move between different places. But also say it's my agency, so I've got no intention of going anywhere else. I can be a brand ambassador for that agency as well. So, you know, the stat I always band around, you're 12 times more likely to engage with a person than you are a brand. So actually, from that point of view, it's really important that you think about that brand as being as important as you think about the actual brand itself, because you're more likely to engage with the person. But also that means if I'm engaging with the person, I'm going to look at what else they've said, what else they've done, what they've done elsewhere. Before I go to a meeting with you, I'm going to Google your name, maybe to find out about you, all those kind of things. That needs to be consistent and reflective of what we do. And I think it's important from a kind of marketing perspective, but also from a personal point of view. And I think with AI going forwards, the AIs are being trained on what's online. So say you did something a long time ago and it's online still, the AI is being trained on that data potentially. So you need to think about what are people looking at, but also what's the AI looking at? So if you've got an author page or you've got something else, that's the stuff that's going to really help you potentially.
There's a big issue there, right? Big old fly in the ointment. Because actually, if one of those data training sets that's been used to train the AI has a ton of stuff in it that was grabbed before you put in that right to be forgotten 100%. Request.
And that's why do it now is my point, is kind of like get this sorted now. Take a look at this. Even if you don't think it's relevant to you, go Google your own name and go page 1, page 2, page 3. See what comes up and go, okay. Now, the key is some stuff might not be relevant. So you want to do more relevant stuff that pushes this down potentially as well. Look at all of your social profiles, but think about the stuff like, have you got a SoundCloud account you don't use anymore? Did you have a MySpace or whatever it might be? All those social platforms in the past.
That's the thing. Once stuff out there as well, even if you remove it off Google, kind of it's still out there and people can still see it in it.
Can see it now. Really? Timmy Mallet and Kylie Minogue?
It's amazing, right? So he's got to go through and have you got any idea who Timmy Mallet is? No, I didn't think you would do as well. Yeah,
he did itsy bitsy teeny weeny yellow polka dot bikini.
He did.
Like an 80s classic. Yeah,
we'll listen to it after.
I'm not sure classic is the right word, but it's
an 80s thing.
Right? Exactly. We'll listen to it after.
Search for it on Spotify.
It's going to be a pleasure. We'll put it in the show notes.
Cultural experience.
What a great reason to put it in the show notes. targetinternet.com/podcast.
We love you, Timmy.
So yeah, I think you need to go through and have a look at all of that previous history footprint you've had, bring it together, then think about some sort of proactive way of, in LinkedIn or whatever the social, but even if it's anywhere else, can you post stuff that's kind of making the search engines understand what you're about, what's important to you, and that's going to have an impact on all these algorithms, but actually what people kind of see.
I've got a question I want to ask you, Louise, because I think I'm interested, like the generation gap here.
Yeah.
Like one of the things I have a hunch on is that people used to kick off on like social media to get their own way with companies. And I don't think that's so much a thing anymore, because I think in the back of people's minds, they're a bit more sensible now and realise that actually, if you do that, if that's the route you go, that remains on your permanent record and it's going to get picked up by recruiters when they go to look at, well, who is this person that says they're perfect and wants to work with our company? But is that a consideration?
I don't think that people of my age specifically do that anymore. So I think people are more conscious of the stuff that what they post online stays online. And any time that people look you up, they can see what you're doing and that might have an effect on you. So
how does that like change people's behaviour, do you think? Like what's the thought process going on in people's minds when they're like thinking, what do I or don't I do?
I think they are just more conscious. I think a lot of it does have to do with maybe future employers and the way that, you know, people are conscious of what people will think of them moving forward. But I think it definitely does have a big effect. I think people still do it as well.
I think this is fascinating because if you think about who's ranting online, it doesn't tend to be younger people. Just I think maybe also because it's about an entitlement thing. If you're a bit older, you're a bit like, how dare you? Do you know who I am? I'm really important. You must sort this out for me now. Whereas if you're young, you're kind of like, please help, right? You probably haven't built that same level of arrogance that maybe comes with age sometimes as well. Maybe not always, but I think that stuff's there. And this is a really, really good point, right? So you go online, you are outraged that you've been treated a certain way, and you post all this stuff. You might be completely valid and correct. But there's always that thing of like, you can judge someone by how they treat waiting staff in a restaurant, right? You can maybe judge people by how they treat customer support staff to some extent as well. And people will judge you on those kind of things. And you might be really, really angry and be upset that something's happened, but people are going to look at you and go, you're a ranter. So I would agree with that. I don't necessarily think that a lot of people live up to that. I think a lot of people are quite rude to people.
It's about the platform as well, because I'd say in general, people would turn to Facebook to sort of rant about businesses and stuff like that. Whereas as a generation, Facebook is becoming less and less a priority for us, and we're more focused on Instagram and TikTok, and that's not the place you'd really discuss.
Yeah, I mean, Twitter for customer service is happening a lot still. So people are going, we're having a huge thing with British Airways at the moment, where the only way you can tweet to customer service is to go via Twitter.
And it is that, isn't it? It's the path of least resistance. Like, I wish companies would wake up to this. Like, if you've shut down all the phone lines and put in like phone menus that are, you know, more complex than like Medusa's maze, like, what do you expect? Are people going to take publicly to public forums and start airing your dirty laundry there? Yeah,
and I think that's definitely part of the kind of user experience piece. But I also think that people then they're out in the mindset because they're having a public conversation. They're not direct messaging people, but they kind of forget this stuff's going to be public afterwards as well. One of the things I saw a lot when everyone was getting concerned about Twitter and Elon Musk took over, people were, there's no security and all this stuff's going to happen. One, I didn't necessarily agree with a lot of that stuff, but also what seems to have happened is that they've realised that everything they say is visible. So people are deleting their profiles and all this kind of stuff. But everything you've ever said is going to be online somewhere, because the Wayback Machine, if you haven't looked at it, have a look at the Wayback Machine, has got historical footprints of what every website looked at since the beginning of the internet, pretty much. So it's there. And I think, one, maybe the fact we're having conversations in public the whole time should make us more public and make us more kind. It doesn't seem to have done that. I haven't noticed suddenly everyone being nicer online. But what I'd say, if you want to think about it from your own point of view, think about that is your footprint. It is the sum of all your touch points. And in a lot of your touch points, you being rude to some customer service people, the brand might have deserved it, but still, think about it.
It's a shame, isn't it? I wish everybody would just be nicer to each other. Really, just be nice. There's no harm in it. The world kind of needs that, and yet it sort of falls by the way.
Well, cynicism is
ourselves, don't we?
Yeah, we do, and I think that
in the moment.
People feel on Facebook particularly, which is interesting.
Screen rage.
Yeah, well, it's also like, you'll read something and they'll just be very, very, very cynical about it, good news or bad news. And then people pour on with it a little bit. And actually, it gets to the point it just gets ignored as well.
There's also the debate of that there's no such thing as bad publicity. So if you think of Elon Musk, for example, and some of the stuff that he says online, but I mean, everyone knows exactly who he is.
Yeah, I mean, there is a bit of that. I mean, Ryanair were great for that. We're going to charge you £1 to use the toilet on our airplanes. And everyone's, it's outrageous. And everyone's talking about them remembering the brand, causing links through to their website.
And their social media tone. It gets a lot of backlash, but also gets a lot of publicity.
Yeah, because it's funny as heck as well. So, yeah, I think there's a bit of that in there as well. But I would just say you are the sum of all your touch points. And it's realising that if you act differently in different platforms and those kind of things, just be aware of it. Being mindful of the whole thing is important.
The other thing I wanted to add to this is I think it puts anybody that's not active at a distinct disadvantage, and that's wrong. Right? So, for example, I actually do not personally use social media anymore.
Yeah, right.
I just don't. And yeah,
you've never been keen.
Not really, because like in the big scheme of things, it's just not that important to me. The only interest I have in it is learning how it works.
I can make a point on that then. Yeah. Your social footprint then is your books that you've written.
Yeah.
So it's the podcast. So you've still got social footprint. It's just particular places, and maybe you haven't got the other stuff there. So from that point of view, that's good. You're aware of it.
My SSI score would be flatlined a long time ago.
But it's not relevant for you maybe to that extent as well. But if you wanted to then make stuff really relevant, really visible in LinkedIn, you'd have a problem.
But is that right? Because that's the benchmark everybody's using to judge me, and yet it's missing a ton of data, and it only knows what it. Do you see what I mean?
It's part of the LinkedIn algorithm. The bottom line is all the social platforms have algorithms that are deciding what shows and what doesn't. And if you're not active and you're not getting engagement, you're not going to be rewarded.
Well, it's like we were talking on the previous episode about SEO and how new websites are going to struggle to rank because there's no positive signals pointing at them.
That's it. So I think that's the problem. Anything algorithm based has to be based on something, and if there's nothing, it's not able to judge it very easily. However, there are plenty of incredibly famous people and successful people that are not on social media. So actually, it's about what realm and what sphere of influence you really want. And if this is important to you, what I would just say is clean up what you've got is the main thing, is just to kind of keep an eye on it from that point of view as well. So personal branding, we'll put some stuff into the show notes that will be relevant, targetinternet.com/podcast. We'd love to hear your opinions on this as well, because I think there's some ethical things that come out of this for young people going into their first careers, for someone that's had a problem in their life and then they've turned things around. Are you being punished against those kind of things as well? It's easy to manipulate this sometimes as well. So for fakery, what happens? And now we get into the interesting space as well, which is what happens when there is a deep fake of you doing something. How do we differentiate what's real, what's not? So there's all sorts of debates and questions that are going to come out. And we're going to do a future episode on all this deep fake stuff a little bit as well.
Please subscribe for more videos like this and visit targetinternet.com for more free digital marketing resources.